How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Agave and Cactus Talk. Today we're going to be talking about California Assembly Bill 2303 from the congressional session of 2021 to 2022. Right. So today's topic is going to be the good, the bad, and the ugly behind this bill, because there's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad, but there's more ugly. And I think, a lot of people need to realize the implications of this bill and the language of this bill if they're going to be farming, distilling in California, because it has far-reaching implications. And it's going to affect everybody's business a little bit differently, but, we'll talk about that today. And I think that, most farmers or distillers in California don't even know about this bill or California AB2303, the California Agave Commission Bill. So, California AB2303, the bill I'm talking about today, is the California Agave Spirits Law, whereas AB 2606 is the California Agave Commission Law. So, actually, most farmers and distillers don't know about this law, either of these laws, which is why the previous podcasts were on AB 2606. And while that bill is a long read, today's podcast on 2303, or California AB 2303, that bill actually is about a 1-minute read, and it's really quick and simple bill to read. And if you just Google California Assembly Bill or AB 2303, and then you put parentheses 2021 and 2022, it'll pop up, and you can read it really quick. So I think this bill was, while I'm gonna talk ill about it a little bit today, I don't think it was passed with malicious intent. I actually thank the California Agave Council for the bill, because its mission is actually a great mission that I support. I don't support the California Agave Commission and AB 2606. I've always said the reason I'm fighting for it so bad is, one, to try to prevent it, but two, if the industry supports it, I can't do nothing about that. I just want to make sure that it's a commission that represents everybody, not just a select group of people, which I see it as doing in its current form, right? But I actually, on this 2303 bill, I really support what the council was trying to do. You get me? Because they are trying to ban the additives, right? And show California agave industry at a higher standard. So, and we'll get more into that, what I like, what I don't like about the bill. But, like I said, I just, think that maybe the mission of the council, by making it such a simplistic bill, maybe got convoluted a little bit, and the bill needs some addressing to make sure that their mission that they wanted for the bill is actually completed. And we'll talk about some of those issues today. So let's get started right with the good. And the good part about this bill is that it shows the California politicians, hey, we're here. We are these farmers, these distillers, these processors that are giving this agave crop a chance in California. We need your support as politicians to make sure our industry is going to be a successful one for us. And it shows, that we're willing to work with the politicians to make sure that the industry is successful, right? And as I mentioned, it shows the presence to the politicians, right? Because I guarantee the majority of them never even fucking heard of farmers growing agave in California prior to this bill being discussed on the floor, right? On the assembly floor. So that's great. Now they're thinking about us, and when they pass bills, for instance, that maybe aren't specific to agave but affect farming, now they got us in their head. They're like, hey, how would this one farming bill affect the agave farmers? They're going to think. You get me? Because now they know that this commodity is in California, and they have constituents which are voting for them that want some action done on this agave industry, right? So that's a great, good part of the bill, right? Like, opens the door to more work to ensure the industry, or more work with the politicians to ensure the industry is successful. Alerts them to our presence. Good stuff there, right? Now, let's talk about a second good. Well, actually, before I get to that second good, I wanted to mention that this is good because we also don't want the politicians, I give an example. Very much so, the AI industry grew quicker than the politicians regulated it, right? So, like, a lot of that industry, the politicians weren't keeping up with how the industry was growing, right? So, they didn't get to stop a lot of the problems in that industry before they were created, right? Like, the stuff that people are fighting today, like data centers and shit, right? They could have early on, I give an example. China, a lot of their data centers are run on solar. We could have just, with one law, boom, all data centers gotta be solar. They would have never put that shit in the middle of fucking communities, right? Because, there's not huge solar fields to power that in the middle of LA. You get me? So, they would have had to go to areas that are running on solar, right? They could have put, all of their water has to, be produced from, a sustainable way, right? So they could have said, hey, you can only pump this much from the aquifer. You don't have unlimited pumping, right? So it's like they could have done lots of stuff before the industry got out of control, right? But they chose to just let it scale, right? So us agave farmers getting at the forefront, we don't want the agave to absorb a lot of the aquifers. We don't want the agave to be oversupplied and be worthless like in Mexico. There's a lot of stuff we want to get ahead of before it becomes a huge problem in California, right? And for that, again, thank the council to alerting the politicians that we're here and we need some help to ensure it's a successful industry. So that is a great good, right? So we'll get to the second good now, which is that the bill bans the use of flavorings and coloring additives. Now, once again, this is a really good thing in theory, but we'll get later to how the phrasing of the bill maybe leaves a lot of room for the prime mission of banning of these additives is not accomplished, right? And that could be a huge problem, because if the intention was one thing and then what happens is another, the bill is unsuccessful, really. But yeah, speaking of additives, we don't want to add. Well, I'll get to that later. So yeah, those are two great things, right? Great goods. The banning of the additives, and then the showing our presence and making this the first bill. Now, the third good that I'm gonna bring up is in the last portion, kind of the last sentences of this bill, and it is that the bill already highlights how there are existing regulatory bodies that are regulating California agave spirits, right? So it shows how the California Department of Alcoholic Beverages already can confiscate mislabeled bottles that are mislabeled as California Agave Spirits. So I'll give an example. Say something was produced in Arizona and they lied and they found out it was not produced in California and they labeled it as California Agave Spirit. Then they would potentially be able to get their bottles confiscated and repossessed and, disposed of, right? Now, I think this third point is really great to highlight, and I'm glad the bill highlighted it, because it says the California Department of Alcoholic Beverages, they don't need any new funding for this. They already have money allocated. This is already their job. They already have people handling this, and that's great, because I'll give an example. They give people, licenses to produce the spirits. So it's like if they encounter a case where people are lying about it coming from California, they already can deal with the repossession of those bottles and making sure that company is held accountable, right? Now, why am I highlighting this as an important point? Because in the other bill, the second California Agave Bill, AB2303, a lot of the argument for the levies on farmers, growers, or processors and distillers is, that these levies are needed to form this bureaucracy so that the, regulation can make sure that the California agave industry is being kept in check, right? And I disagree with the need for this bureaucracy and increased taxes, because there's already taxes that are dedicated for this. So every gallon produced in California of spirits pays approximately $6 in excise tax, right? So I think about $270 of that goes to the federal government, and maybe $330 of that goes to California. I may have it reversed, but the point is it adds up to like $6, right? So why is that important? Well, there's already funding from distillers to basically, on everything that they produce, to regulate them. And this money funds, for instance, the federal regulations, and it funds the state regulations, right? So the excise tax that California gets, that directly funds a lot of the regulatory actions, right? And most people don't know everything that is produced, right? They have to have a room that it's all stored in, and that room has to keep accurate numbers, and they can get in trouble if it's not accurately managed. And the reason for that is that they produce the bottle, they put it into that storage room. The moment it leaves that storage room and goes to a buyer, that's when they pay the excise tax. So that's why already what's proposed in AB 2606, a lot of that record keeping is already in existence. They're already doing the record keeping of all the bottles they produce, who they sell to, because that's how the excise taxes are charged, right? And it shows already, hey, the feds in the states are already regulating this, right? You got the TTB, right? And you can't put anything on your freaking label of a spirit in America without first going through the TTB and them regulating you. If you want to put a certain thing, I say, for instance, you want to say, my spirit is, organic, or my spirit is produced in X way, that way, they are going to tell you whether you're allowed, how to do it, and the point is they're already getting funded and they're already regulating us. So I think this highlight in the bill is important because it shows, okay, existing regulatory bodies, existing taxes, how those taxes are being administered, and it shows a lot of what they want in AB 2606, and that bureaucracy is already in existence for, the distillers. And, I've done the math already on this, and it's really sad because what I figured out when I did the math is that, the taxes essentially per gallon of distilled spirit that the California Agave Commission and the proposed AB 2606 bill are proposing would be 3 to 4 times the cost of the California plus the federal tax of $6. So you're potentially looking at anywhere from $18 to $24 of added cost, right? So they literally want, in some cases, potentially 4 times what you're paying to the feds and to the state to just create this bureaucracy that I've discussed in the previous podcast. You know, less than 10% of the research or 10% of the money will be spent on research. And it's like, you know, most of that money is going to go just to the bureaucracy, administration, and marketing costs. Most of the marketing being marketing that doesn't really affect most of the farmers that are being assessed the levy. So, you know, point being, you know, people are like, hey, we hope the Agave Commission is this way or that way. But what they're proposing, a lot of examples already show that, you know, we're already having what they're proposing in regulatory bodies. A lot of the research, you know, there's like infinite research. And a lot of these bureaucracies they want to create, there's already existing ones. So it's like, you know, it's a tough sell to me because the point of it being 3 to 4 times more than what the feds and the state want to fund the commission, you know, these levies. Well, that just means added increased costs for people. So I give an example. There's a 10 to 20% on California spirits, distilled spirits, margin. This is an average. So the average distiller in California selling wholesale makes about 10 to 20%. Selling direct to consumer makes about 30 to 40%. So what I found out is essentially that, you know, 7% of your revenue, not your profit, would be going to the California Agave Commission in many cases of these smaller growers, right? It would get less of a percentage if you were a large distiller or grower, which is a problem because it's basically like regressive tax. You know, the small people pay more, the large people pay less. Huge, you know, discriminatory tax in my opinion. But the point being that, you know, if they're paying 7% of revenue and they're only making 10-20% margin profit, there's not much room for that distiller to have a problem, to have a bad batch, to you know, have off distillation days. Like, very quickly they could be in the hole, right? Because regardless of if they sell that distilled spirit or if it sells well, they're going to be paying money on it, right? So a lot of issues with that, right? If the Agave Commission is charging more without providing, like, they're charging more than the state and the feds in levies, and as I just mentioned, not really providing any new progress or benefits, right? Existing industry is already regulated, it's already taxed us, and yeah, it doesn't seem, you know, the commission taxes would be really justified. But the point being, getting back to the third good point, existing regulatory bodies, as shown in the AB 2303 bill, already show there's a lot of people regulating us, and there's a lot of cost on these distillers, and that's why they have such a low margin of only 10 to 20%. Now, where this has gone better is with the direct-to-consumer. Now they're making 30 to 40% because they cut out a lot of the middlemen. Many states, they got 3-4 tier systems, and a lot of these middlemen make most of the money instead of the distillers. Now, why is that important to mention? Well, the Agave Commission, while I hate it, you know, taking 7% of revenue when they're making 40% direct-to-consumer, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. Even though I don't like the commission, that's actually a scenario where maybe it could actually still be funded without screwing the distiller so much to the point where they're on the brink of bankruptcy, you get me? But here's the problem with that, right? Direct-to-consumer, we've only had it since 2020. During the epidemic, they started allowing, you know, I think 1.6 liters per day per consumer could be shipped. And, you know, these craft distilleries got another option of making money right that way, and now they're making better margins on the direct-to-consumer, 30-40%. But in many cases, that's sometimes as low as 10% or as high as 30% of their business, right? So while they're making better margins, because it's increasingly new, it's only been out for 5-6 years for many of them, and they have to apply to be able to do that and pay a fee, you know, it's still not a significant part of their business. And again, why I'm mentioning this is that it's being heavily attacked today. The big distilleries don't like the small craft distilleries selling direct to consumer, making better margin than them. and not selling wholesale, and then it's taking a lot of their market. So that's why they're fighting it with, tons of money from these big distillers being donated to politicians today. This is a today issue, not some future thing that's going on right now. Big distillers are trying to shut down the craft distilling bill that allowed for direct to consumer, because they want to take out their competition, essentially, so that they can sell more, which is sad. There's two ways to build a business. You build your own tower, or you destroy someone else's tower and use their materials, and these big distillers, instead of competing with the small craft distillers that are in some locales outselling them, they have to go to the politicians and beg and try to take them out that way. It's a real sad, I bet those motherfuckers scream that they love capitalism, but they're coming over here with their bullshit and cronyism, funding the politicians to do their bidding of banning the small craft distillers from direct to consumer. So, anyways, that bill may be going away in 2027 if it's not reapproved. So right now there's a huge fight from these small craft distilleries to try to get people to vote for the, or not vote, to email and talk to their representatives so that people can realize this is being under attack, the direct to consumer, and they can ask their politicians to fight for it, which I encourage you to do so, right? That way the craft distillers stay in business, right? That we as agave farmers or processors, we want to keep them in business so they can actually use our products, right, when they're ready. But yeah, that 30-40% margin, right? You're screwed if it goes away, because you're going to be left with that 10-20% margin. And say the agave commission is added, now they just take 6-7% of your revenue. Man, increasingly getting murked, getting screwed over here as a distiller, because say they lose direct to consumer, and then the agave commission is approved, which we're fighting to stop. Then, man, they're gonna now have two huge losses and increased costs, right? So we don't want that to happen, right? Go support the craft distiller direct to consumer. Talk to your politician. Talk to them and tell them you support that. You want to be able to buy from direct to consumer to have, many times, for instance, the direct to consumer could be a little bit cheaper for the consumer, and it's a better margin for the business. So it's like everybody's winning there. The consumer gets better, high quality shit, and then the craft distiller makes more money. So it's like, also these bills that, they're trying to disapprove for the craft distillers, it hurts consumers. So you as a consumer, even if you're not in business in this agave industry, you should be asking your representative, hey man, what the fuck is going on here? You're trying to take away my options to have the spirits delivered to me at my convenience? Come on, man. Alright. But then, right, that's the third good. So just showing the regulatory bodies are already existing, right? And as I mentioned, we need to maybe protect the DTC, fight the Agave Commission. There's a lot of things that we need to do to not add more burden onto the distiller or the grower or the processor so that they stay in business. We don't want to destroy the industry before that shit's even created, It's like, there's a lot of problems with that. So now let's get into the bad of the bill, right? Talk to you a bit of the good of the bill. Now I'll get into the bad and then the ugly. So the first bad point I'll bring up of this bill is that it's far too simplistic, which leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation and cheating of the primary mission of the bill, right? So there's certain phrases I have a lot of trouble with. And one of the phrases is that California Agave Spirits must be, quote, produced entirely from agaves grown within California, unquote. Now, while the intention of this is really good, right? They want all the agave for California Agave Spirits to come from California, The phrasing is what I have issues with, because it leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation of the primary mission of making all these agave come from California that are going to go into our spirits. And how does it do that? Well, it doesn't provide any timelines, right? It doesn't provide any specification of what grown in California means, because I'll give an example. Grown in California could mean entirely in California could mean that, you know, that agave was produced here, or say it was imported here and grown for 1 to 3 years, and then it still could be at the end of its life put to being a California agave spirit, right? So that would still be falling under produced entirely from agave grown in California. You know, if they use the phrasing, for instance, agave grown its entire life in California, that would have been a completely different thing, because it would have meant that the agave must be born here and must die here at the end, right, when you harvest it. And that is what goes into the production. That, you know, would have been the like I mentioned, the mission of the bill. It would have satisfied it a lot better, right? Because this leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation, right? So I actually pin this law as one of the biggest factors why, you know, and this is where this bill now involves the Mexicans, right? Because leaving this distinction open and not under specification of what makes a California agave spirit, right? That has fueled the massive importation of millions of plants from Mexico and even Europe, right? And this is really bad, right? I mean, a lot of the California agave farmers are being accused of biopiracy. You know, they're, you know, being accused of doing some really shady stuff to get a lot of these plants, you know. And to put it into perspective, today, Mexico, as I mentioned earlier, the agave plants are practically worthless. You have to pay people to come harvest them from your fields. People don't want them. And coyotes are paying, I mean, it's gone up a little bit, but, you know, the last I checked, you know, about 50 cents a kilo, right? And I'm talking, 50 Mexican cents, right? So less than 1 peso. And I think last I checked, maybe it's like 18, 19 pesos to $1, right? So, I mean, it's a really low amount per kilo, right? Because of the overproduction of a monoculture crop like Agave tequiliana. And the same thing is actually happening in Oaxaca now, or huge mescalero states where, you know, their agave espadín is being oversupplied and overproduced, and now it's practically worthless, right? But why I put that into perspective for you is that these Americans that are importing the plants from Mexico, whether or not it's biopiracy or not, you know, again, I've never imported plants from Mexico to farm, but these farmers that are doing it, whether or not it's biopiracy or not, I still think it's really wrong, because it's, you know, they're doing that at a point where it's a super low in Mexico. Like, the people, they don't even really have a choice whether to sell or not to the Americans, because there's no market. So it's like, if the Americans are the only market that you know, these importers that want to bring it to America, then that's the only thing they could sell to. So it's like the market is so crap in Mexico that they'd rather export the plants than like them just rot. So I understand that portion, right, from the Mexican side. I understand the Mexican side that sees this as a huge competition to tequila and mezcal, right, because they're importing the same agave. And I tell you, us Californians aren't so excited about it either, because they're the most water-loving agave that are going to strip our aquifers of the groundwater resources, right? But getting to the point of the bad, right? This law essentially misinterpreted, allowed for these large industrial scale agriculturalists. I don't really like calling them farmers, because I've never seen one of these motherfuckers with a shovel out there, you know. I mean, they're really just business owners that own these large farms and employ a bunch of Mexicans. But anyways, that's a separate point. But anyways, these large agriculturalists, they know, okay, I can import millions of plants from Mexico and still call it California Agave Spirit at the end of the day. So they know they could cheat this law, this AB 2303 law, and they can grow it here for, you know, for instance, if you're importing, you know, some of these hijuelos that are pretty big I've seen come in from Mexico, they're already 2-3-year-old plants. You know what I mean? If I grow an agave from seed to get an agave to that stage, we're talking 3-4 years for many of the species. So they're importing plants that are practically worthless in Mexico at a historic low and getting them from you know, like I give an example. If they would have bought these plants 3 years ago at the historic high, then the Mexicans would have been earning a lot more money on it, right? They would have been, like, I think it hit like 30 pesos a kilo. Now, they would have probably been earning 30 times the cost on those plants, right? Because the competition would have been selling it into the spirits. So what I don't think is right is that these large farmers took advantage of, one, the California law, realizing they could cheat the system, and two, of the Mexican farmers, because they bought it at the lowest price ever. They waited like for the perfect time to import these massive quantities of plants. And like I said, they're choosing to import low quality hijuelos in many cases that are the most water loving agave, the shit we don't want to start our industry from, you know. But I'll get to that later in the ugly, right? The point I really just want you to get here for the bad is that it basically fueled the massive importation of plants, right? And we'll talk about it a little bit later. Because the beginnings of this industry were far different, right? And I'll explain to you a little later. So the next bad is the phrase, you know, where they're talking about banning the additives, because they say we're going to ban the additives of flavorings and colorings, right? And while this sounds good on paper, here's my issues with it, right? By using this specific phrasing and not choosing post-distillation additives, they leave the room for additives that are odorless and flavorless, right? As well as, you know, lack coloring. So any fillers that, for instance, they're not going to add coloring, they're not going to add flavoring to the spirit, could still be used. And we don't want to import the problems that Mexico have of the reason why this whole additive-free movement has started, right? That people are complaining they don't have access to spirits that are additive-free, and, you know, they, in many cases, don't even know what the heck's in their bottle, right? Like I mentioned earlier, the ingredients on alcohol doesn't need to be listed. That applies to Mexico, too. So they don't even tell you the additives that they use, and that's why there's lawsuits now, because they say, oh, 100% agave, and they're using additives, so people are like, oh, what the fuck? But then they are abiding by all the CRT regulations for 100% agave, so it's like, the CRT regulation, 100% agave, don't mean 100% agave, but it's like, the courts are like, what the hell is going on here, you know? It's going to be a very interesting case there, because like I said, the companies are fulfilling the 100% additive or agave for the whatchamacallits, the law that they have for the CRT. But in America, 100% agave, if you put that on the label, it has to be 100% agave. So that's, I think, where the discrepancy is going to be, really, if the power of the denomination from Mexico is more powerful than how the courts regulate the labeling. We'll see what happens, but that's why that fight's going on, you know, and now a bunch of distillers in Mexico are like, what the hell, they're getting in trouble for saying, oh, we're additive free, they're getting regulated by the CRT, their bottles held up in many cases, like all these issues, right, arise from additives. And it's like California, right, why am I saying this is a bad part of the AB 2303 law, is that by not putting both post-distillation additives, it leaves a room for all those fillers, right? So what happens is this. In Mexico, they'll do the same shit. It's odorless, it's colorless. They don't want anybody to notice the difference, right? But say it adds to this, or it takes away from the product they have to use 1-2%. Well, that 1-2% scaled over thousands of bottles, over 1 million bottles, that's a lot of money, right? So these small distillers are priced higher because they're using, agave 100%, and then these big distillers get to abide by their CRT regulation and still use a little additives, like say 1%, and then they're making more money, and they get to have a cheaper spirit that sells more because of that. And it's like, but people aren't realizing they're drinking the additives, right? So while the intention of the law was great, the implications of not using the proper phrasing is really going to screw us, right? So this is where, once again, the oversimplification of what they were trying to do is going to cause a lot of room for misinterpretation, right? And here's the other thing. It says no flavoring, no coloring additives. Well, there's a fucking problem with that, because most of the aging of spirits, of agave and other shit like whiskey, is all done in wood barrels. So if we, age in wood barrels, it's going to add a flavor, it's going to add a color, and it's an additive, right? Now, what the fuck do we do there? Does that mean that wood aging is now banned, right, under this law? That's my interpretation of it. And it's funny enough, because I went through this bill with one of my friend lawyers, and pretty much like there's some points he told me I was a little wrong on, but pretty much on this point he was like, yeah, you're reading it the right way. That's how I would read it. And it was real interesting to me, because how the hell does California expect to compete globally with this increased demand, like supply, and all these spirits coming? I know people producing spirits now in France, Italy, Germany, fucking African countries, people in Guatemala, people in Peru, people in a bunch of states in the U.S. It's like, how the fuck are we going to compete with everybody's aged spirits if we can't even use the same shit that they're doing, right? Of wood barrels. Now, I found a loophole there too, where it's like, okay, steel barrel aging. It doesn't add odor. It doesn't add flavor. It doesn't add color. And you still get an aged spirit that is vastly different from the initial shit. I really like that stuff, but I brought this point up to the homie. It might just be that a lot of the craft distillers, that are the ones kind of using this steel aging, it might just be their product is fire. So I don't know really if the distinction is the steel aging, to be honest with you. I think just their aged products are fire. But that would be a way around that to still fit within the framework of the bill that, I discussed with my lawyer homie, and he was like, yeah, that would be a cool workaround. But the point being, okay, a good way to change the bill would be, right, like you put both post-distillation additives. So now you get rid of everything that they were wanting with the flavoring and the coloring, as well as fillers. And then you make an exception for aging in wood. Because you might age in old wood barrels and get a pink rosé motherfucking agave spirit that has new color and flavoring, or you might age in whiskey barrels and get a brown or a orange tint that's now slightly different in color and flavor, right? So it's like, we don't want to ban the primary way that people are aging their spirits. And it's funny, because I've seen some people they're aging in bottle or in barrels, and I don't think they even realize that under this bill that's illegal, right? So that's already causing issues, right? That they maybe don't even fucking know about, or nobody in the regulatory body has tried to call them on. But it's something I think about, because say one day they don't like your distillery, they could take you out under that law, right? So because right now they're allowing those wood-aged spirits to still pass as California Agave Spirits, but what if as I just mentioned, the California Department of Alcoholic Beverages, the regulator for the mislabeling of California Agave Spirits already, right, as we mentioned in the good. What if they don't like your distillery and just decide, fuck, we're just gonna now start enforcing this on his aged spirits, and say you got a bunch of aged spirits, it's the majority of your production, now you can't sell it. now they repossess it. Yeah, it could definitely fuck your business over. So that's our issue. That's a big bad. So now I want to get into the ugly, right? I gave you some good, gave you some bad. Let's get into the ugly. Well, the ugly for me, I was mentioning a little bit earlier, and I have to catch myself and be like, I'll talk about it later. If not, there won't be an ugly. But it's that, the misinterpretation of what California Agave Spirit could be, because it can be an imported plant, right? You could potentially have, like, say, I thought about this scenario. I was like, I could import 5-year-old agaves, get them super cheap right now, because a bunch of people are selling them because they're worthless in Jalisco. Bring them to America on some semis, these 5-year-old plants, put them in the ground for 1 year, let them mature to a harvest rate, and I could create a California Agave Spirit. And as I mentioned, people are importing 1, 2, 3-year-old hijuelos that are big as fuck already, and they're able to call that a California Agave Spirit, which is, in my opinion, very, very wrong, and why I'm discussing with some people. I want to create a certification program where we certify that your agave was born, grown, and processed in California. The trio. I don't want this imported shit to dilute our brand. So I think there needs to be certifications, right? If this bill is left how it is, right? So obviously I'm proposing some changes to it, but it's like, who knows if that shit will happen, right? That has to happen at the industry level, and that's kind of why I was discussing this bill, because it's like, okay, there was fucking, me and my nursery friends believe at this point that the bill was passed, there was probably 150 growers and distillers of agave, right? And then at the point of passing of AB 2306, we believe there was around 300. Now, many of us believe there's around 500 to 600 growers, right? Why is this important? Well, when all these bills were passed, most people didn't know about them. So it's like, the people of the council California Agave Council were representing, say, less than 10% of the industry at each point that they were passing bills that affected the whole industry. So that's a fucking issue, right? But the point being, if people want to change AB 2303, if people want to change AB 2606, we as an industry have to come together and propose changes, and they have to be debated by the politicians. It's not just like, oh yeah, the California Agave Council or the California Agave Alliance could change shit. We can't. At this point, it's up to the politicians. We could suggest shit, that's for sure. And that's what we're trying to do, right? But the change is no longer up to us. That's why proposing these bills needs to be an industry-wide effort, not just the council or the Agave Alliance. And we very much in the California Agave Alliance try to include people from the council, people that are in neither of the organizations, to make sure that their voice is heard, right? Because even if they don't want to be part of something organized, their voice is important to make sure that the industry is including them. But getting back to the ugly point, right? This importation of millions of plants that are extremely cheap from Mexico and low quality is an extremely sad thing for me. Because the beginning of this industry, say in 2016, I didn't really know about other people that were farming agave, but I started farming, and most of my agave came from gardens in LA, Ventura, San Bernardino, Orange County, and I got them out of gardens, recycled them, brought them to the farm. And over time, what I was saying is sorry, I had to drink some water, but then all my agave, over time, a bunch of them died, the majority of them died, and most of those were Mexican cultivars, the ones that made it, that I could dry farm on really low fucking water. And in the cold that we get here, it drops to 15, in many places around the U.S. It drops to 0 where people are farming agave. It gets up to 110 here. Today it's fucking 111. It's fucking crazy. There's a lot of extremities that the agave from the United States and California native agave population are being exposed to, right? So obviously the ones that made it on my farm to be dry farmed were the USA and California natives, and that's the majority, of my farm, California and USA native agave and cactus, which is great. That's how that industry developed at first, and then I gave a bunch of plants to other people. That was great. I'll give another example. Doug Richardson, one of the other big nurseries that sells agave, the homie over there in the I think he's in like Carpinteria or Ventura area. Well, he's been selling agave for dry farming for, I think like 4 decades, man. And it's like, you know, as well as cactus, by the way. But, you know, the varieties, once again, that he is selling are these varieties that take a lot less water, right? And, you know, they've been adapted and naturalized in California for a lot of decades, right? Like the agave I took out of gardens. Many of those were here for centuries in gardens in LA before I removed them. And it's like, that's what I tell people all the time. I'm like, I've only been American, you know, my lifetime, but it's like some of these agaves, they died, or they were born, they died, died, like already 10, 15 generations in some of the locales where we're harvesting them. And I'll joke to people, man, these agaves are more American than me. But, you know, a lot of Mexicans disagree, and I understand those points too. But getting to the point that, you know, the beginnings of the California agave industry, before these large importation of millions of Mexican plants, it was agave coming from nurseries that have been growing this shit for generations. And the agave came from stuff that had been here for generations, right? Even Craig Reynolds, the president, you know, the founder over there of the California Agave Council, his agave came from a nursery here in California, his initial ones. So it's like everything was started from California nurseries, right? California nurseries, when we sell our plants, the agave industry in California grows collectively, right? Because it's like, you know, how do California nurseries compete, right, with the cheap importation of these plants or the massive importation of Mexican agave that are extremely cheap and low quality? Like, people obviously going to buy that shit because it's way cheaper, right? Whereas these nurseries for decades upon decades have been this specific moment of when the agave industry would explode here, and now it's finally come for them, and all the money goes to these large industrial California farmers importing the agave, you know, low quality shit from Mexico. That's a huge disappointment. You get me? And then I think you know, distillers are like, oh, that doesn't affect me. Yes, it does, dude. Because the plants that they imported, obviously, when you buy from a California nursery, it's going to be a little bit more expensive because they grew it in California, right? They went through all the hard work here. They got lots of different species, not just the one that they're importing on a massive scale. The Angustifolia, subspecies Tequiliana, cultivar Blue Weber, or the subspecies Espadin, which is also an Angustifolia, both used for agave spirits in Mexico, mezcal or tequila. And you know, it's a shame because this distillates that they make are going to be way cheaper than the shit from California, like that was actually born here, grown here, distilled here, right? And that means that obviously the consumers are going to have a choice of this cheaper imported Mexican agave that was turned into a California agave spirit that cheated a little bit versus the shit that was actually born and grown and produced here. And that's a problem for me, because that means these small craft distillers are going to be put up against industrial distillers that are going to essentially dilute the fucking brand, one, but also take you out of business, two, because now they have a cheaper product than you. And when people are first going to try the California agave spirits, they're going to go for cheaper brands and to try to give us a shot, and they're going to try this low quality bullshit that's produced industrially. That's a huge fucking problem if the first thing that people taste is this huge industrialist shit and it's cheaper. Because you as a distiller, me as a distiller, we got a lot of room to make up there, right? Because their first impression is going to be shit. That's a huge problem, man. You know, people talk about how they drink shit tequila and then they don't drink it for 20, 30 years. You get me? And then finally they try some additive-free shit and they come back to it. But imagine losing 20, 30 years of a consumer that you could have sold some good stuff to. That's a problem. So again, why the wording is so fucking crucial, because it's going to dictate how the industry moves, right? So these guys, they know they can import agave into California and call it California Agave Spirit, which to me is fucking wrong, to be honest. You know, the agave I'm using is born here, it's grown here, and it dies here, bro. So it's like, I see that, you know, as an actual California agave that could go into a California Agave Spirit. This shit that they're importing, I think it's going to dilute our brand and make us really look weak, you know, because we're going to produce some bullshit. And then, you know, the Mexicans, man, they're always going to produce cheaper spirits, and if they're higher quality than what most people try available of California spirits, then we're going to lose on a lot of fronts there in competition. Because, you know, me as a nursery, say growing agave for agave farmers here, right? The whole reason I'm dry farming is because water's extremely fucking expensive, dude. It's not that I don't got the money for the well, I don't got the money for the fucking city water, but I'd rather dry farm because it's super expensive and people are being hella regulated. So it's like now, you know, some of these big agave farmers, this is what I predicted would happen in other podcasts, and now it's fucking happening. It's hilarious. But I predicted that a lot of these regions where they were starting to plant the agave, they were going to get a lot of their groundwater cut off significantly, and now it's happening. These groundwater basins are bringing them into compliance, and it's like, you know, they're not going to have the water for the agave type that they're trying to farm, which is kind of crazy. You know, they just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, many of these farmers on these farms that aren't even going to fucking be viable. And they don't even realize it, many of them, because they don't even know what the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is. It's crazy. Farmers, they you know, they really hate politics, but it's like politicians, that's why, you know, a lot of us get murked because we're not reading the laws that affect us. We're not trying to fight them. We're just trying to stay on the fucking farm. And, you know, I definitely agree with that mentality too. Like, I don't like leaving my farm either, but, you know, now with Zoom and remote and all this bullshit, I mean, dude, you know, we talk to politicians in the California Agave Alliance. We talk to other people in other industries, and we do all that on Zoom. You know, so it's like we could connect with people all around the world in California, all around California. So it's like now you don't gotta leave your farm. You don't have an excuse to not participate in politics that are affecting you, bro. If you don't participate in trying to put your input for the California Agave Commission or for, you know, California Agave Spirits phrasing, then don't fucking complain, man. I complain a lot, but you know what? I provide suggestions for what the fuck to do. I provide suggestions for, you know, how people should come to a common agreement on stuff. It's like, you know, yeah, you don't have the right to complain if you're not even fucking participating. Put it that way, man. You know? And that's what I tell a lot of people. They're like, oh, I'm not going to vote on AB 2606 so I can hide and they're not going to know my information. That's not going to work either because they're still going to fucking regulate you. So if you don't vote, now you're just going to get regulated without any participation. Now it's taxation without representation because your dumbass didn't want to vote. So, you know, and for instance, you could vote if you only have 1 acre of agave. So the bill might not affect you, right? If you're not processing over 3 tons or if you're only growing the agave, say, a few acres. But you can still vote and decide. You know, you should have the option of growing your farm if you want to and not being regulated in a shitty way you don't like. So, anyways, getting back to the bill, right, of 2303. How do you compete as a nursery? You got all these increased costs of water, of land in California being more expensive, of labor being paid really expensive in California. You know, we got all these safety requirements in California that, you know, Mexican companies don't need to abide for. You know, we got all these chemicals banned in California that the Mexicans are able to use to grow their agave really cheaply. It's like, you know, we already have a really, really higher cost than Mexico or, say, India or, say, other countries that have really cheap labor and land and environmental regulations. So, you know, it's really hard to compete with extreme cheap agave imported from another country as a distiller, as a processor, as a grower, you know, because we are going to follow the actual law how it's meant, right? And then we're going to be producing, sure, higher quality stuff, but more expensive, and that's going to be an issue, man. Because, look, I'm fine with product being expensive that's coming out of California because we have a high environmental regulation. We pay people right. The land, you know, it's expensive because everybody in the world want to live here. It's like, okay, there's certain costs we can't avoid, but let's not keep adding to all this shit or we're not going to be competitive at all in any of the agave industries, you get me? So if we allow, for instance, cheap Mexican agave to be imported at a massive scale, how we've allowed, it dilutes the California Agave Spirit brand. Because people don't know, oh, was that an imported plant or not an imported plant? People are going to ask that. You get me? And there's nothing that, it's like the whole additive thing, right? Like people and, you know, Mexican brands could be like, I don't use additives, 100% agave, you know? But because they don't have to list the ingredients and because they're abiding by all CRT regulations, they could just like default to that shit, you know? And the same thing is going to happen here. They're going to be like, oh, well, we're under the classification of a California Agave Spirit abiding by all the regulations. Yeah, but the regulation is misphrased, so it's like you cheated it, you know? But we're going to create the same issue kind of right here. It's a really ugly issue. So as I mentioned, a lot of the nurseries, a lot of the distillers, a lot of the processors of agave for different industries, they're a little bit like not happy about this. You get me? That like their brand is just being diluted now by allowing all this, you know, lower cost agave that now is going to affect them because now they have to compete with it. Like, we're already competing with other nations in other states that are going to start producing agave spirits. Now we're competing with ourselves? Fuck, dude. Fuck, that's fucked, you know? Now, another thing that happens in Mexico, right, is that a lot of agave, say Espadín or Tequiliano, is grown in another state and brought to Jalisco to be made into tequila. A lot of it's illegal, some of it's legal, you know, because other states could grow agave tequiliana or Espadín. But the issue here is that they're lying about the denomination, right? So if I give an example, take that agave tequiliana and say a non-tequila producing state, no, Guanajuato wouldn't qualify because they can make tequila. But just for the example, just say Guanajuato could not produce legal tequila, right? Like, they can't, in the specific places in Guanajuato, take their agave tequiliana, distill it, and call it tequila. Well, what would happen is they'll move it over to Jalisco to tequila, and they know they could get more money per bottle because it's coming from tequila. So I think the same shit is going to happen under this law. People are going to bring agave from say Arizona, say Florida, say Utah, these places where you could probably produce agave for way cheaper than you can in California, right? And I've discussed why that is a really good thing, by the way. But say they could produce the agave that we're growing, all the different varieties, cheaper over there, and then they import it at the halftime, you know, like say the agave takes 6 years, they bring it over here. It's still economical to bring it, say, at 3 years. They load a truck, they bring it all to California, they put it in a field here, and they grow it. Well, now they've grown half of the agave's life in a state that was super cheap, and they could distill it here where it's worth a lot more, right? Say theoretically, right? Because maybe Arizona spirits may one day be higher quality and worth more than California's, right? So, but just for the scenario. So, we don't want that to happen. We don't want an agave to come from another state, another nation, to be imported, and then basically dilute our brand because it was grown for 1 to 3 years in another nation or another state, and then it could still at the end of life be called California Agave Spirit. Now, once again, nobody that I know, to my knowledge, has done this, but dude, if I can in 5 minutes think of these scenarios, you think businesses with millions and billions won't think of this shit? Like, they, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, they got not one consultant like me. They got teams of consultants. That's their whole fucking job. Find the loophole so we can make more money, man. Yeah, you know, it's gonna happen if we allow it to happen. That's why you gotta, from the beginning, like I said, change the phrasing so that these one-day cheaters wouldn't be able to do it. So I gave an example, right? If they would have put the proper phrasing, completely born in California, like every California agave spirit must be produced from agaves born and grown completely in California to the point of distillation. That would have solved the whole importation problem. The Mexicans wouldn't be mad, the small California farmers wouldn't be mad, and the big agriculturalists wouldn't have been able to import millions and millions of plants. With one line, I could have solved this shit. Like that's the sad part, right? Because they proposed the bill, nobody knows about this shit. Boom, boom, they leave this fucking loophole for the big agriculturalists to exploit. And I thought of that in 5 minutes. I would have fucking told them right away, like that would have happened, and we would have avoided what happened, say 2 years later, which is that these massive agriculturalists that are giant farmers already, they got thousands of acres already in production of other crops, for them to start doing their huge monoculture models now with agave, right? And importing it from the cheapest place possible, which was Mexico at the time. So that's fucked. You know what I mean? Like, we could have solved this a long time ago. Now we have to go back, and our brand's been diluted, and now we have to fucking fight this shit, because if not, we're gonna have imported California Agave Spirits, and we're gonna have non-imported California Agave Spirits. That is a fucked distinction that could have been solved right from the beginning. Now, another weird thing about this bill is that it specifically has language saying they cannot stop people from saying that a spirit was specifically distilled in California, because that's like how they say, like, lore accurate. You get me? It's like, okay, say I use additives, and I don't want to be the label California Agave Spirit, that phrase, those 3 words. I produce my shit in Los Angeles, California, and I use additives. You get me? And I use some imported distilled juice from Mexico. I'm not even going to give a fuck about the agave. I'm just going to import the juice. Well, okay, I just told you maybe a pretty shitty... I don't want anybody to fucking Google it or whatever, but it's like, there's actually brands that have done this already, right? They import juice from Mexico, they distill it in their place of origin, and then they're using additives, and then they show, okay, the spirit is California Agave Spirit, or whatever state Agave Spirit. Well, you know, not really, man. I mean, the whole process was Mexican, and you brought it over here, and just the last process made it Mexican. You get me? Or American. It reminds me a lot of the wine world, because this is what the wine world is complaining about a lot right now, right? So cheap grapes coming into America, them distilling it, say, in Napa, and then now it's a Napa wine. They could put on the label, made in Napa, California. So say they don't even give a fuck about the AVA distinction, which in this case would probably be the equivalent, say, the California Agave Spirit label, right? They don't give a fuck about the AVA model, the American Viticulture Association label of Napa. They just put on the bottle, made in Napa, California. And this, you know, is creating all this cheap wine that is now actually competing with the wine from Napa, California, the Napa Viticulture Association, right? So people are cheating these laws already in the ways I'm showing. You get me? The wine world shows that, and then the agave spirits world shows that, because people have imported the juice, distilled it here, and then they call it whatever agave spirit from the state, right? And this law, you know, maybe wanted to stop people from doing that, right? But it's still going on, I know, in several other states. And yeah, it's just a huge fucking problem. You get me? Because you're never gonna stop a place being able to say I created it here. So you need to have a better phrasing in this AB2303 law to distinguish in a spirit that was produced in California and a spirit that was, you know, the whole agave grown, and that used to distill in California, right? Because people are already cheating these systems using juice, using imported plants, growing them here a little bit at a time, and then distilling them. So it's like, there's a lot of potential for abuse of this California agave spirits law, right? In the ways I've showed you. And we don't want any of that. We want to change the law so that we, you know, have fair competition of everyone that's making California agave spirits, and people that are producing a lower inferior product can't use that label. You get me? But yeah, the point is, right, that in the AB 2303 bill, they say we can't stop people from using it. So that means there needs to be better clarification and certification of the whole agave process. You get me? Now, I wouldn't want it to be as crazy as cannabis, but, you know, a good example is cannabis, where it shows, you know, they could track exactly where that plant was born all the way to, you know, where it's sold. That is a crazy amount of tracking. But if we could simplify that for agave, you get me? The CRT does a version of that, right? You have to have CRT certified agave to make, you know, a CRT certified tequila. You get me? So we're going to need a version of that here, because if not, people are going to cheat the system. So that's the biggest thing that I see as an ugly too, right? But yeah, like I mentioned, in summary, this bill, it had a lot of really good intentions. The way that it was applied and people are applying it are really ugly. And we need to fix it before, you know, all the agave in California are these water-loving agave that are extremely shit, that are going to destroy the aquifers and are going to just piss the fucking Mexicans off, because now we're competing with them with the exact same fucking product. You get me? Like, I give an example. A bunch of us are growing, you know, agaves that aren't even utilized in Mexico, that are USA and California natives. They, you know, it's not competing with them if we're literally making products from our own heritage shit from the United States. You get me? Now, if we're taking agave angustifolia, subspecies tequiliana, cultivar blue Weber, that's a fucking tongue, you know, twister doozy. And then if we're taking agave angustifolia, subspecies asparine, and we're making spirits with that at an industrial grade, really cheap, by importing all their plants when their agave economy has crashed. And now we have this industrially produced copycat tequila, copycat mezcal in California that is going to be competing with the Mexican stuff, jacking shelf space, you know, and it's an inferior product. Man, that's a huge fucking problem for both countries, man. And that's why I've been telling the Mexicans, like, they need to join our fight on actually, you know, like I give an example, like, if the Mexicans wanted to ban the massive importation industrially of spirits or of these agave and of the juice, they could just apply the phrase that I told you, right? They could have just said, every California agave spirit must be produced from agave born and grown to maturity of when they distilled it in California. Just that phrase would have solved all that shit. So it's like the Mexicans, the CRT, or whoever is representing the Mexican agave farmers, you know, the unions that they have, they need to be on our side fighting for this shit too, because it's affecting them. And they're not even realizing that their biggest competitor is building this massive fucking army to take them out. You get me? Because, yeah, it's like, man, you know, some of these California farmers I've mentioned before, they are going to make the shit that Jalisco and Oaxaca, that people fear of the ecological destruction, they're going to make that look healthy. We're going to do some way crazier shit, man. The Americans always do this. And that version of the agave industry, I want no part of. You get me? So it's like Mexicans, Americans, we all need to fucking come together and try to fight shit like this. You get me? And that's where I've told a lot of people the agave industry is global, because now we have bills in California affecting Mexicans, right? I mean, man, this is a huge problem if we don't address it. Like I said, there's a lot of good in this bill. We just need to implement it better. There's a lot of bad, and there's a lot of ugly. And hopefully today you learned a little bit more about AB 2303. Like I said, it's like a 1 fucking minute read. Go read that shit. But yeah, as a farmer, processor, distiller, you should know about the bills that affect you. And this is definitely one of them that's going to be big time, and you should have on your radar. And I encourage people to ask questions about this, you know, to their lawyers, to whoever, and you know, get clarification on a lot of stuff too, you know. I mean, I'm not fucking super expert on all this stuff, but, you know, as a historian, I studied a little bit at a point, I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I was like, fuck this is kind of boring. But I learned how to read really quickly a lot of laws and, you know, books and court cases, because a lot of the laws, a lot of the time how they're interpreted are all down to court precedent, right? So the law could say one thing, but the court says another, and that's really how the law is implemented. So, point being, you know, a lot of this laws, people in the future are going to sue over the misinterpretations and just cost the Agave Commission, the state, the farmer a lot of money. And the only people that win there are the lawyers, man. And this will be fought out in court if people don't have a very, very clear definition of what the fuck a California Agave Spirit is, right? So, I gave an example. Maybe one day somebody brings a lawsuit that says, hey, you know, the imported agave from Mexico being used to produce a California Agave Spirit, that's not actually California Agave Spirit. And they go to court and they prove that. There's going to be a lot of money spent there and a lot of angry motherfuckers. So we need to clear it up in the bill before any of those issues happen. But yeah, anyways, hope you learned a little bit today. And if you got questions on the bill, leave them in the comments, on the IG, whatever way you can contact me, and I'll try to answer them for you if I can. And on AB2306 too, you know. And you know, I know a lot of people may see this bill as simplistic to read too, but if you speak Spanish and you want some clarification on either of these bills, AB2303 or 2606, feel free to reach out. Yo los puedo ayudar, contesto sus preguntas. But yeah, have a great rest of the day, everyone, and let's go out there and hopefully try to change this bill a little bit, you know, make it a better bill that represents the whole industry. But have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next one. Hopefully we'll have some other farmers coming on the podcast soon. I've been a little busy here at the farm, but got a lot of podcasts in the back burner I want to put out. Got a lot that I have planned to make, and we'll start getting some pods out for you, ladies and gentlemen. So have a good rest of the day. Agave and Cactus Talk out. Peace.